And welcome to the general election hustings organised by Scottish Autism and the National Autistic Society of Scotland. My name is Andrew Lermont and I'm a political correspondent with the Herald. Very shortly, I will introduce you to your panellists and explain how today's event will work, but I have some quick housekeeping rules to go through before then. Firstly, there will be no comfort break. However, we encourage people to move around and go and make a cup of tea or coffee or go to the toilet if they need to. The event will be recorded and you will be sent a copy of that recording afterwards to view again. Questions are encouraged. We'd love to hear your questions to the panelists. They should be submitted via the question and answer box on the Zoom. If you submit a question via the chat box, it may be missed. If your question is for a particular party representative, please start the question with their name. We understand that the chat box can be distracting, therefore you can turn off notifications by clicking on the wee up arrow next to the chat box and deselecting show chat previews. If you are in that chat, you'll notice there's a bit of text there. We ask you to be nice, to be polite, to be agreeable. And if you have any other Zoom-related problems or concerns, please pop them into the chat box. It is being monitored and a member of the team will try to help you. What's going to happen now is I'm going to run through who our panelists are and give you a quick biography, and then I will invite all of them to speak for up to 5 minutes. And then we will go to questions, and we'll have questions for about an hour or so. And then after that, we will ask them to sum up again. So let's start off with the panelists from the Scottish Liberal Democrats. We have Amanda Clark. She is the I think we're going there. Sorry, I haven't quite got the alphabetical order of my bio list here properly. Sorry. So let's. The first up is Karen Adam. She has been the MSP for Banffshire and Buchan Coast since 2021. She is a parent of autistic children and has been a carer for her deaf father. She's currently the convener of the Parliamentary Committee on Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice, which has been discussing the potential for a disability commissioner. She's also co-convener of the cross-party group on children and young people. And she's previously asked questions in Parliament regarding support for neurodivergent people. She's from the SNP. Then we have Amanda Clark from the Liberal Democrats. She is the candidate for Perth and Kinrossar. She was a teacher for 30 years, but is now a full-time carer for her son who has a learning disability, autism, ADHD, and epilepsy. She is passionate about standing up for families who have children with additional needs. In her spare time, she volunteers and fundraises for charities such as Rainbows and Guides, as well as Macmillan. And then from Labour, I don't know if she was running a bit late, so I don't know if she's joined us yet. We have Eva Kessner. She's a candidate for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross. She has a professional experience in the politics and charity sector, namely regarding finance and operations, and currently holds leadership roles in violence against women and girls sector. She's also worked at the European Parliament and at Holyrood previously. Despite struggling at school, partly due to dyslexia, she studies public communication at both QMU in Edinburgh and Stirling University. She advocates for transparency and community engagement. From the Conservatives, we have Gillian Tiberin. She is the mother of 2 teens with additional support needs and underwent cancer treatment in around 2021. She is a candidate in Aberdeen North constituency, where she's lived for nearly 20 years. She attended Robert Gordon University to study publishing with honours at Open University. She's also worked in HR management and learning and development for both small, local and international businesses. Having also been a caseworker in the past, she holds an interest in local issues. From the Greens, we have Nerys White. She is the candidate for Alloa in Grangemouth. From Falkirk, they study psychology at Stirling University, where they co-founded the Disabled Stirling Student Society. They are autistic and have chronic fatigue syndrome. They have campaigned on a variety of issues, including LGBTQ and gender equality in Scotland, as well as advocating greener society. And they are your candidates. Now, we are going to ask them to speak to you, as I said, for 5 minutes. We're going to do it in alphabetical order based on their surname. So with that, I'm going to hand over the floor to Karen Adam from the SNP.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. So I am Karen Adam. As you've heard, I'm the MSP for Banffshire and Buchan Coast. I am supporting the SNP's stance on everything autism today, and what we are doing in regards to supporting autistic people. I have autistic children, and over the last few years, I have came to a late diagnosis myself as an autistic woman, and I have an autistic grandchild as well. So this is something that I have lived experience of. So in terms of, making decisions and understanding what people with autism need, sorry, I'm fully aware of that. So in terms of the SNP stance on that, at this moment in time, we're doing quite a bit of work into supporting people with autism. We are at the moment consulting on a learning disability, autism and neurodivergency bill, and that is looking to how society can better support people with autism. In regards to reserved matters, of course, and what I would be wishing to see from an MP, an SNP MP at Westminster, I would be asking them to support the implementation of the Buckland Review, which was, I think we got sight of that in February this year. And that is mostly looking at autism and employment. I recognise that, 3 out of 10 people are aren't in employment who are autistic in regards to other neurodivergent conditions, which is very disproportionate when we look at for disabled people, it is 5 in 10. So I think if anything, employment law is reserved to Westminster, and that is something that I will be fully supportive of my SNP MP colleagues to be able to go and support the Buckland Review and the full implementation of that. I think if we want equal footing in society as autistic people, we need to ensure that employers are aware and understanding that there's training giving throughout school years and throughout our employment years. Um, if we look at the wage gap as well, it is the largest for autistic people. And we need to know and understand that, particularly if we look at autistic graduates who are often overqualified for the jobs that they first get into after graduating. So there's a real disparity there in terms of employment and opportunities, obviously, that being able to earn your salary and get through life in regards to that. There we need better equality in terms of employment laws. But I'm happy to ask any questions following on from this today. And thank you for your patience. I have a bout of some flu today, so the brains may be going on a bit slow, but I'm happy to be here for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Now we're going to move over to the Liberal Democrats and Amanda Clark. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name's Amanda Clark. I'm the Scottish Liberal Democrat candidate for Perth and Kinross-shire at this general election. After teaching for 30 years, I took early retirement to become a full-time carer for our son Archie, who is 21. He has a learning disability, autism, ADHD and epilepsy. He will never live independently, and my husband and I have chosen to keep him at home as long as we can. I know from personal experiences what it's like to care for a vulnerable loved one 24/7 and to have to fight for their rights with constant form filling. There are an estimated 2.4 million of us carers in the UK, and many of you will be a young carer or be cared for by an unpaid family member. Some of you will have seen the interview with our leader, Sir Ed Davey, talking first about being a young carer for his terminally ill mother and now for his disabled son. We Liberal Democrats care for carers. Indeed, it was my colleague, Wendy Chamberlain, MP, as MP for North East Fife, that has led the Carers Leave Act through Parliament. This entitles carers to a week's unpaid leave by law. We've opened the door to support those trying to balance the cost of living crisis with working and caring. Yet we know there's so much more to do. We will now be calling for 10 days paid leave, the earning thresholds to be raised, and stop the prosecution of carers by the DWP for accidental overpayments. We need guaranteed respite and more facilities for overnight short breaks. In our Scottish manifesto, we've recognised the importance of retaining and recruiting care workers and propose a new carers minimum wage, boosting the minimum wage for care workers by £2. Family carers will also be given an extra £1,040 a year through carers allowance, soon to be carers support payment in Scotland. If you elect a Liberal Democrat, you elect an MP who cares for carers. Education and health are devolved, but these are crucial policies for families who have young children and have children and young people with ASD. Liberal Democrats believe that all children have a right to a good education, but the presumption of mainstreaming is not necessarily appropriate for all pupils on the autistic spectrum. Some may be able to cope with mainstream schooling with extra support. Others need a calm, secure learning environment with more specialised, individualised teaching. The Scottish Liberal Democrats are concerned about the stories of families that have a constant battle to get what their child needs and deserves. Exhausted from day-to-day care, they have to produce mountains of paperwork and face appeals. Delays and procrastination have an impact on the whole family, most of all the siblings. Following the Angela Morgan review, the Scottish Government response was to announce a special needs plan, but it wasn't funding. You can't do mainstreaming for pupils who have autism on the cheap. A Liberal Democrat MP will stand up for pupils with additional support needs and their family. We are determined to hold the SNP government to account for the promise of 3,500 more teachers and classroom assistants. Sadly, it is more likely that a young person with autism or Asperger's will have mental health issues as they attempt to navigate social and emotional challenges and perhaps questioning their sexuality. The Scottish Liberal Democrats believe that mental health is important as physical health. We have always been strong advocates of getting more counsellors into school. Teachers can't do it all. The Scottish Government committed to ensure every secondary school in Scotland had counselling services. Requests later revealed that the target had been missed. We would use the money raised from tripling the tax on social media giants to ensure there is a mental health professional in all schools at every stage of education and through into working life. Autistic children become autistic people, and they have much to offer the workforce and economy. There is a need for greater knowledge and the understanding of the needs of people with autism in the workplace, and we propose mental health first aiders. I balance my caring role with volunteering for various community groups and the local anti-poverty charity. I also regularly complete hikes to fundraise for a cancer charity. My wealth of experience in teaching, charity work, and fighting for my son's needs means that, like any other Liberal Democrat MP, I will be a strong champion for carers and the families of autistic people and children. Thank you very much for listening.
Great, thanks for that, Amanda. Next we have Eva Kessner from Labour. Eva, over to you.
Hello. So I'm not sure the video is working.
We can hear you. We can hear you. We can't see you. Oh, you've gone. Have you gone?
Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, it's not the greatest line in the world, but it's. Do you want to sort of give it a bash and we'll see how far we get?
Yeah, sorry about this. Joys of the internet. So I'm Eva Kessner, and I'm the Scottish Labour candidate for Kids and Southern and Stars. I've lived experiences around challenges around the road where I can deeply understand that I haven't done this and getting the right support is really vital. So I have dyslexia and ADHD myself. I also live in a household. My husband's autistic and quite a few other members of our family as well. We know that too often families really have to. I'm really sorry about the echo.
Yeah, the sound is pretty awful here, Eva. I can't really make out exactly what you're saying. I wonder if we could maybe sort of move on to someone else and come back to you. Would that be all right?
I'll see if I can get some headphones.
Yeah, sure. No worries about that. Okay. Sorry about that, Eva. Thanks very much. And also sorry to Gillian, I'm afraid we're going to come to you a wee bit earlier than promised. I hope you're ready and good to go. Are you?
No problem. Just trying to turn on my camera. Hopefully you can hear me
We can
okay.
hear you. That's perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much again to both charities for allowing us to take part today. My name is Gillian Tebberin. I'm the Scottish Conservative candidate for Aberdeen North. I have experience with autism and various other conditions, as both my children have received autism diagnosis, and my son is ADHD also. They're both in their teens. My daughter is 19 years old and my son is 16 years old. And so daily I face the challenges that I think every parent or any person suffering from conditions that affect their family as much as anybody. One thing that I'm really passionate about is supporting job opportunities for people on the spectrum or neurodivergent in any way. One challenge that I have experienced as a parent is with further education. I found it's very difficult for children to get a good place in further education, to have job opportunities, to have further training opportunities. And that's something I would like to see more of. And also one thing I would like to see is better respite opportunities for parents and for carers. I just don't think that's there at the moment. We know how exhausting it can be to be carers at times, and I would like to see better opportunities for respite care. Both my children are adopted. We adopted them when they were young, and that presents challenges in terms of the fact that you don't always know their background or what their birth parents' condition was before they came to us as a family. So that's an extra challenge that we have faced as a family, and I'm keen to support adoptive parents, particularly with their autism journeys. I would like to commend both charities for the amount of resources they have for parents and carers. I think they're absolutely fantastic, but I do think we need a more joined up approach between charities throughout Scotland, because I don't think it's always clear to parents where they can turn to for help, or they can feel overwhelmed by knowing which charity to go to. So that's something I would really also like to see. ASN support in schools, both mainstream and in units, is absolutely vital, and I would like to see that extended. I don't believe that our teachers and our PSAs in schools are being supported properly, and I would like to see that change going on as well. As the Scottish Conservatives, we are committed to modernising autism services and making them fit for purpose going forward. And mental health spending will also increase with the Scottish Conservatives. We're committed to 10% increase on the NHS budget. We also support various reviews that we can go into later. I'm sure there will be lots of questions about that. And one of the main things that I would like to get from this session is I want to listen to you guys. I want to hear what your experiences are. And if I'm selected as your MP for Aberdeen North, what I can do to support you. Obviously, I have lived experience, and I can talk more about that if there's opportunities to do so later. But I'm here to learn. I believe that where possible, we should have a cross-party approach when it comes to autism services. I think every person so far has had a lived experience, and I think it's important we share on that and we come together where we can. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Gillian, much appreciated. I'm going to go to the Scottish Greens next and to Nerys White. Nerys, all yours.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi there, my name is Nerys, and as an autistic person, I've been campaigning for the rights of our community ever since I was 7 years old and trying to create my own autism radio station, because I wanted the adults in my life to know that we are worthy of an equal seat at the table and can speak for ourselves. And almost 20 years on, I haven't yet stopped campaigning. The Scottish Greens are where I found my home because they are the only political party in the UK who are anti-behaviourist and pro-communication. We believe actions, not just words, are needed to uplift the disabled community. And as such, we are also the first political party in the world to adopt a position of being against damaging and cruel behaviour modification practices, such as applied behaviour analysis. We are the only political party in the UK to have been led by an openly autistic person, and I'm proud to work for said person in an office that is managed entirely by disabled women. That office, much like this panel, is a great example of the kinder, fairer and more representative politics that I'd like to be a part of, which reflects the beautiful diversity of the communities that we we hope to represent. For my key policies, well, the Scottish Greens want to recognise that the climate crisis we face is also a crisis of humanity. It's through the actions of greedy billionaires and corporations that we are now collectively facing a global crisis that should be at the top of every party's political agenda. Yet, the Scottish Government has failed to meet a key annual target for reducing climate emissions for 9 years in a row now. And before we even get to election day, Labour have already cut their £28 billion green investment pledge in half. We need stronger and bolder decision-making to steer us out of this climate crisis. This is having a direct impact on poverty rates in our country. Climate chaos has become the world's biggest stealth tax and is being paid by our poorest and most vulnerable, here and overseas. To tackle this, our focus would be to secure funding from the richest 1% in the UK, and that alone would provide over £75 billion for our public services. Scotland had already, with Greens in government, adopted a position of no support for coal, oil and gas extraction on land. In Westminster, we would take this one step further by calling for a ban on coal, oil and gas companies from advertising in the UK. A big passion of mine is healthcare, especially reproductive care. We will ensure a written constitution provides fundamental legal protections for the right of all residents, regardless of your nationality or migration, to free healthcare. That includes all forms of healthcare, hospital treatment, mental health services, dentistry and eye care. It was the Scottish Greens who've delivered free bus travel for over 700,000 young people across the country and who doubled the Scottish Child Payment. It was the Scottish Greens who this month passed the Safe Access Zones Bill to protect women accessing healthcare without harassment or intimidation, brought forward by an MSP from my hometown and where I'm standing in this election. This bill had support from every party in Holyrood and on this call, and following this campaign, if elected to Westminster, I would look to bring about the full decriminalisation of abortion in the UK by repealing the 1967 Act to stop vulnerable people who fall pregnant from being treated as criminals in our country. This general election may have been called in such a way that even the Tories are playing catch-up, but I feel it couldn't have come soon enough to get this Conservative government out of power and elect those who truly seek to serve the people of their community. So if, like me, you value people, community and planet at the ballot box, then vote like your future depends on it and vote Scottish Greens on the 4th of July. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Nerys. Well, let's come back to you again and see if we can hear you this time. Oh, Eva, are you there? Have we lost you completely now? Oh, I think we might have lost Eva entirely. Okay, well, we can always come back round if she's able to appear at some point again. Let's start off with some of the questions. That was some really interesting opening statements there, and we talked about sort of. Oh, sorry. Yes, if you have a question, you'll see the question and answer box down the bottom of the screen there. So just put your question in there, and we have. I think we've got an hour and 20 odd minutes to answer as many questions as we can, and we will do our best to do so. So let's start off with one I thought was quite interesting, just about the structural factors behind the mental health crisis among autistic people in Scotland. How do you and your party intend to address the structural factors behind the mental health crisis among autistic people in Scotland? I suppose it'd be quite handy to maybe sort of spell out some of what those structural factors might be. Nerys, I'll come to you, seeing as you were the last one there. Would you want to take that question on?
Yeah, sure. So structural mental health factors, we would say that this comes down to the funding issue that we are coming up against time and time again between Westminster and Holyrood. We have Greens in almost every level of representation, and with more Greens in Westminster, we would be looking to advocate for a fairer budget that actually supplies Holyrood with the resource and the government with the resource that they need to make sure that mental health is a priority across the board. We know that young people in particular who are autistic or who are seeking a diagnosis or who are autistic and struggling with their mental health are facing a postcode lottery, and it's just not on across the country. So we would want to make sure that not only is CAMHS discussed as a matter of priority and in need of desperate funding in Scotland through the budget deal that comes from Westminster, but we would want to make sure that we can cut down that diagnostic waiting time. We have sorry, my audio has totally gone there, so I thought that I was disconnected from the call. So our priority would be to make sure that we can work collaboratively across the board, as we recognise that this is a devolved issue in Holyrood, where we already have Greens representation. Health being a matter for the Scottish Government is one that we have been working on and will continue to work on this level. In Westminster, slightly different game. We would want to make sure that we are working side by side with our representatives.
Amanda, can I come to you in this one?
Yes, hello. This is a big thing for the Liberal Democrats. We are putting mental health at the forefront of healthcare. We believe that mental health is as important as physical health. And one of the things that we are proposing is to treble the tax on the social media giants. And as I said in my speech, we want to use that money to get counsellors, mental health professionals into all schools to support youngsters and young people. We also understand, and I think I'll follow what you were saying, our Green representative here was saying, that it's the delays that are so detrimental to families. Getting an appointment with CAMS, we're talking about psychologists. So, you know, it's the structure needs to be looked at, and there needs to be more focus on the peripheral as well, not just you know, the psychologists, but also behavioural therapists in schools to help children. And also one thing that we are proposing is mental health professionals in workplaces and a greater knowledge and understanding of autism. I know my husband has some autistic people that work with him, and he's got a good understanding, obviously, from bringing up our son and our family friends. But we need to, I think what we need is an empathy and an understanding of the issues that autistic people have. And as we've been saying, not only children in school, but also people in the workplace. So we would be looking for a multifaceted approach, a holistic approach, and obviously using our, you know, our leader, Alex Cole-Hampton, is very, very passionate about getting mental health support in schools, and using taxing the social media giants that cause a lot of the problems to provide the funding for that. Okay, thank you.
Right, thanks, Amanda. Let's come to you now. What's your answer to the question here?
Thanks very much. Well, I think one of the first questions that we need to address is the issue of funding. We're often criticised for funding coming from Westminster, and in fact funding for the Scottish Government has been at the highest level that it's ever been from Westminster. So for me, the question is also more about how we actually spend that money and being sensible with the way that we spend money. Our education system here in the UK, in Scotland in particular, is failing. It's absolutely failing. And our teachers are not being given enough support. The ASN support members are not being given the support they need. So what I would like to see is more funding given to training professionals in schools. Very often I hear from teachers that they're just at their wits' end because children who are so-called mainstream are being let down because the teachers are having to deal with kids with additional needs, that there's not enough wings for ASN children, that the PSAs are just not being given the training they're required to deal with some of the issues that they're facing in school. So yes, I absolutely agree that, you know, we should have more money spent on autism services. I think the charities have a great role to play in that together as well. They're doing an absolutely fantastic job. But it's really important that we use that money wisely and that we all join up together on that. And one other thing I would like to say is that as parents, and you know, we've talked a lot about lived experience on here, I think it's really important to have elected members who have that experience in their families or are on the spectrum themselves. I think that's really important, and I think that we should have boards where we work together with parents, we have a collaborative approach, and we just don't leave voters and families out of decision making. I think it's really important to get them on board, and policies should be shaped by parents and with those with lived experiences.
Excellent, Gillian. Karen, what's your answer here?
Thanks, Andrew. Now, there's a few points to pick up on there. I mean, firstly, in regards to funding, we know that, we're talking about reserved issues here if we're talking about Westminster election. In regards to sending MPs to Westminster, I would hope that they would be arguing for greater budgets spent on mental health support, on disability support overall, and more investment in the English NHS, which would then in turn increase the Barnett consequentials for Scotland to give greater spending. But I don't want to, pass anything back and forth, although this is about a Westminster election here. Obviously, we need to be looking at the core issues when it comes to mental health for neurodivergent people. Now, being a neurodivergent person myself, with several children on the spectrum over many years, having experience in this, I can say that one of the greatest challenges is the understanding within the system. And I do agree that there needs to be more training and support. And that is why we are implementing, well, we're looking at the learning disabilities, autism and neurodivergent bill at the moment. We're looking at, this being a social model and not just a medical model. When we look at mental health services, that isn't looking initially at the preventative measures for autistic people in the first place. We need to be looking at the societal issues here that are causing these problems for autistic people. We talk about there's a hostile environment towards those who claim benefits, who need that support. And as I said in my opening statement, we're talking about only 3 in 10 autistic people in work. That in itself, now 77% of those autistic people want to work. So that in itself is causing a mental health issue. So yes, we need the services there to support. I've had CAMS experience in the past, and they were absolutely fantastic. But is that really getting to the crux of the matter? Particularly if we look at women with autism as well, who are often supported for mental health issues, diagnosed with personality disorder, for example, then later in life recognizing that actually their diagnosis is autism. So there needs to be greater care and understanding in what autism is, how it affects people, but how society affects autistic people in the first place, because that will be really truly getting to the crux of the matter. And I do welcome all cross-party support on this and discussions with this with the charities involved, because ultimately as a society, if we keep going down the road that we are and not understanding that how neurodivergence really impacts our lives, then we're never, ever going to get to the crux of the matter. And we can put as much money as we want into it, but if the understanding's not there, it's not going to solve anything.
That's great. Thanks, Karen. Eva, should we come back to you? Well, not one last chance. You can have as many chances as you want, but should we try again? See if things are working now.
Can you hear me at all?
Oh, that is much better. That's great. Absolutely. What's the best way of doing this, Eva? Shall I ask you just to answer the question we've just been talking about here, and then we can maybe come back to your opening statement, I don't know, possibly towards the end of the session? Would that be all right?
Yeah, that would be absolutely fine.
Right. So the question we were talking about is just some of the structural issues that are facing people with autism in Scotland, and kind of the structural factors behind the mental health crisis amongst autistic people in Scotland. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's twofold. You start with the issue around diagnosis. It's an early diagnosis in schools and in education and all of that. And that is really challenging because one of the issues is the workforce isn't there and the understanding isn't there. So I'm really echoing what the other panelists said, that it has to be a really holistic approach to that. One of the key things is getting educational psychologists in as early as possible so you can get that diagnosis, so that you can get the support around it. And one of the other problems is that once you have that diagnosis, it shouldn't be such a challenge to actually get the support you need, and understand that it's not one size fit all. Like, each child will be very different, especially when it comes to neurodivergence. How it presents in different people is also very, very different. And I think that's really key, is having that holistic approach and having that social model of disability embedded in it as well, so that you're looking at how you can provide that support. And I think that has to go through the educational system, but that also requires the educational system to be properly funded and have the resources in it. And then I think the other side of that is looking at that kind of role around employment and that training and understanding once people go into the workforce, whether that's going through further education or not. And I think one of the key things at the moment is there's such a huge backlog when it comes around to things like access to work, and it becomes such a challenge to get the support that you need, let alone the benefit system that can be such a blocker for people, especially around, simply just filling in the forms and having the support to do it. I think we really need to revolutionise that. And that's one of the things the Labour Party really wants to do, is look at the benefit system as a whole and see what we can do to make it easier to make sure that people are getting the support they need. And part of that is also then looking at people that are providing the support, so support for carers out there as well. I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Great. Thanks, Eva. Lovely to hear from you. We've got quite a few questions on diagnosis. So let me just ask this one. Many autistic people, especially a disproportionate amount of autistic girls, struggle to get a diagnosis with long waiting lists. And many autistic girls never get a diagnosis at all, as autism can present differently in women. What steps are the parties taking to fix this? Eva, seeing as you've not done much talking, I'll come to you first on this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first step to it is getting that gendered understanding of autism. I mean, I think that it's not just in this sphere, but more generally, our medical systems have always kind of been built on the understanding of how it presents in men, which means that people get diagnosed a lot later in life. I mean, in some ways, I was quite fortunate that because my dyslexia and my ADHD was quite severe, I did get diagnosed really young, and I actually had, but a lot of that was because my mother was fighting for it. And I think it shouldn't be that. It should be we've got to have that curiosity in the profession. But it's also making sure that we've got enough things like educational psychologists and the healthcare workforce that can actually pick it up as quickly as possible. And that requires funding, training, and kind of rebuilding our public services across the board.
Right. Thanks for that, Eva. Karen, let me come to you in this one as well. I mean, talk to us about diagnosis and long waiting lists. Well, what steps are the SNP and the Scottish Government going to take to fix this? I appreciate this is, devolved, but I think we can't really get away from that in this session.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I wouldn't disagree that there's long time waiting lists. I mean, we're looking at maybe 2 or 3 years, and I absolutely wouldn't shy away from facing that. As we know, the NHS is in crisis at the moment, and it is struggling to cope with a backlog, particularly with neurodivergent diagnosis. But it's not only once you get to see a GP and see those frontline services, it's actually getting to that point of recognizing that there may be something there. We often hear the term challenging behaviors, but often challenging behaviors don't present particularly for young girls, young women, and girls. It comes across as something completely different. It can come across as isolating behaviors. It can come across, as masking and meltdowns once home, and all these types of things that aren't really recognized. Something that I often bring up myself in terms of that is the fact that we need this better understanding throughout schools and early years education. And if people were better equipped to know and understand how autism can present itself. But most of all, I think the key issue here is that we need to address, and the Scottish Government is working on this, particularly in regards to the bill that they're looking at the moment, and how to better serve people, is that parents know best. And oftentimes there's a lot of dismissive behaviors when it comes to parents presenting their child to a teacher at school, but perhaps that teacher doesn't know and understand how these things can present in a child, let alone getting to the GP, let alone getting that referral and getting through that referral. There are a lot of barriers and a lot of gatekeeping, I would say, that are still there and present. And this is something we are working on with as an SNP party in government as well. It is being seen. I can categorically say that this is happening, that there is awareness. I would have liked to have seen this before before, happening well before, but this is why I got into politics, because of the struggles I had had with my son. So, you know, working on this at this moment in time is quite exciting for me to see that we are aware, and I think, you know, working on that is going to be an absolute priority. But it's all these gatekeeping stages along the way, particularly for young girls and women, it is particularly hard. But happy to share any points that I don't necessarily have in front of me at this moment, but happy to share, you know, papers and studies and all those kind of things, and working groups that are working on this at this moment in time.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Karen. Louise, can I come to you in this one?
Yeah, sure. I think what would really help to get the diagnosis rates up, especially when it comes to women, is to move away from that bioessentialist understanding of autism and how it presents in different people. What I mean by that is I was diagnosed before I even reached primary school, and I was told that the reason why it was able to be picked up on and assessed so quickly is because I had male autism, and that's language that should have been left back then. But 20 years on, we are still hearing that crop up in NHS boards across Scotland, that very binary understanding of how it presents in different people. I would like to see that sort of understanding challenged across the board. We are hearing a lot of women turning to private healthcare to make up for both the waiting list, but also how they are sometimes dismissed by doctors in terms of how it presents with them. And we hope that through the guarantee of free healthcare and investing into the NHS, this is no longer needed. But ultimately, although a diagnosis has brought me a sense of comfort in knowing why I am the way that I am, I kind of hope that in the long term, a cultural change is seen where a formal diagnosis isn't required to access the kind of support that ultimately would make environments more inclusive and more welcoming for everyone. In the same sense that ramps are a great thing, not just for me as a wheelchair user, but for a whole range of situations, the type of accommodations that require a diagnosis at present should just be available to those who benefit from it. And it is a shame that people require a diagnosis to access the very basic financial support as well as the accommodations that we see in like universities and schools. We have seen that change. We've seen that cultural change start with the adult disability payment. It does not require a formal diagnosis so much as medical evidence of something being looked into. But again, that depends on you getting through the hurdle of the waiting list. So I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation where removing the requirement of a diagnosis in most regards would stop that waiting list build-up.
Thanks for that, Nerys. Can I come to you in this one, then I'll come to Amanda after that. How would the Tories, what would the Tories do for diagnosis?
Well, I think we've already touched on the fact about waiting lists is the big issue for a lot of people, and we really need to get that reduced. And as you said already, that's a devolved issue. Going back to the issue of women and girls, as Karen's already pointed out, and we don't always agree on things, obviously being SNP and Scottish Conservatives, but girls do mask a lot. And that was the problem we had with our daughter, is that she was very good at pretending that everything was okay, that she was coping fine. And schools don't pick up on that a lot of the time. They just see girls as being very self-sufficient and not having any issues. So I think for me, I would like to see more education for nursery teachers and people working in nursery environments, because very often we're waiting till children are 5, 6 years old to get a diagnosis. And I think it's really, really important that that starts earlier and we start to look at potential issues that we need to be addressed when they're younger. But again, that's down to resources, and it's down to how those resources are managed. But I'm very concerned about the fact that girls in particular are almost left behind when it comes to autism diagnosis and support. In Aberdeen, and I'm sure throughout Scotland, there are a lot of fantastic charities that are working with girls in particular. My daughter attends an organisation called Sensational, which Karen's probably aware of, and they do fantastic work with teenage girls and helping them cope with autism diagnosis. But definitely, we definitely need to have the money spent better in Scotland, and I would like to see the waiting list cut down. I think that would make a huge difference when it comes to CAMHS.
Actually, Amanda, go over to you in this one.
Hi, well, it's very difficult to come in last on this, because to say something that hasn't already been said. I'm going to put my teacher hat on here, and I understand the issue of girls with autism or autistic girls, but I think what's already been said is crucial. We perhaps need to get more into the teacher training curriculum in Scotland about autism. and then also with continual professional development, because I know as a teacher, I've got lots and lots of things to think about during the day. You know, there might be a bereaved child in your class, there might be somebody else who, and you're dealing with lots of things. So I think important to get autistic awareness into the Scottish teaching curriculum, and then there should be continual professional development throughout a teacher's career, because ideas change, more ideas come in, so that's important. I must say, obviously we're going back to getting the diagnosis, and the delays that can be crucial and terrible for families, the stress on families trying to get a diagnosis. So we do need to get more ed psychs in, more behavioural support therapists, and this is where perhaps we need to look at our visa deals again that would come out of Brexit, that we need to look at how we can encourage more people to come into Scotland with these skills. And also, I must say that the SNP tax rates, when they've raised the tax rates and the different tax rates, can't be helping, because those thresholds might not encourage somebody who is an educational psychologist to come and live in Scotland. So maybe we need to revisit the tax thresholds. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. You won't go last next time, I promise you that. But let's carry on this conversation about education and teaching, because there's a couple of decent, really interesting questions in the Q&A box here. And we're still taking questions, by the way. Still keep putting your questions into the Q&A box. Let's start with this one from Juliet. What will your party do to provide more investment into education so that teachers are properly educated about autism, that the education system is adequately resourced and redesigned and developed to meet the needs of autistic people? And there's one from Charlene too. Education is devolved, so what realistically can you do as an MP to influence issues such as training, presumption of mainstreaming, etc.? So I think, Gillian, I don't think we started with you. Let's start with you in this one, if that's okay.
Sorry, yes. So we're speaking. Sorry, could you repeat the question, Andrew? I was just writing down some notes there.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. So 2 questions. What will your party do to provide more investment into education so that teachers are properly educated about autism and that the education system is adequately resourced and redesigned and developed to meet the needs of autistic people? And then second one about the devolution and reserved issues. Education is devolved, so what realistically can you do as an MP to influence issues such as training, presumption of mainstreaming, etc.?
Well, as I said before, I think that collaborative approach is really, really important, and you've touched upon the fact that this is a devolved issue. So, I mean, we've mentioned about funding from Westminster. As I said, it's at the highest level that it's been. We get more per person than any other place in the UK. So, to me, it's not just a matter about where the funding's coming from; it's how we manage that effectively, and that's really a question for the SNP government. Now, obviously, when it comes to the next election here in Scotland, the people of Scotland have a choice as to who's running the country, and I would like to see us implement our new deal for teachers that the Conservatives have put in their Scottish manifesto, which means that teachers are fairly paid, that they're supported properly, and that resources are best placed for children with ASN, and that there's also things like more wings for special needs in schools as well. In Aberdeen in particular, we have Bucksburn Academy, who have a very effective ASN wing in the school, which is attached to the mainstream school. And that's something I would like to see more of as well in Scotland, because I think that's a really effective model where it gives children with complex needs the opportunity to be in a mainstream education, but still get that individual support that they need when they need it.
Thanks for that, Gillian. Amanda, let's come to you then. Let's come to you second this time.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, education is devolved, so it's up to the Scottish Government how they are dividing up the pie for education. And you know, there have been promises made by the SNP for classroom assistants, and we do need to support the teachers. We need proper contracts instead of short-term and 0 hours work. We need more classroom assistants and more non-contact time for teachers. And yeah, I mean, it's all about how we support the teachers in school, and how we decide, how the government decides to divvy up the funds. And we do need to make sure that we're getting educational psychologists working in schools and CAMs working in schools. So it's part of a bigger picture of how the SNP are deciding to use the funding that comes from the UK government. And obviously Liberal Democrats, MPs and MSPs will continue to push and support for more classroom assistants and more professionals that can make up part of the picture to support autistic children and teachers in education.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Nerys, I'll come to you this one next, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So on education, we think that any training on supporting autistic pupils to deliver to educational authorities, to schools and to councils has to be co-produced with autistic people. There is so much in the way of expert voices and a real untapped source there of expertise and of talent that is currently not used. We are sadly still seeing training resources going out that is using language that's outdated or not preferred by the vast majority of the autistic community. We are even seeing educational resources in some areas of Scotland that is making references to ABA, a seriously cruel and outdated practice that our party was the first ever to come out against. Education can transform lives, but currently a lot of policy, both in Holyrood and in Westminster, is quite focused on making young people job ready, as though their productivity and their worth is based on what they can give to the economy. So we would want to put more emphasis on a more holistic approach that nurtures young people's talents, to encourage creative and analytical thinking, to invest in an education system that is accessible to all. And if elected, I want to navigate that relationship between Holyrood and Westminster on education by immediately lobbying for a summit between unions such as EIS FILA and other teaching unions and the UK government to see how pupils in England may be supported, as that would be Westminster. And I hope that in doing so, I could set an example that should be followed by other devolved nations on calling for that summit between the teaching staff, the autistic community themselves, and representatives that, you know, from autistic-led organisations and the government on how we can better navigate the resources that are out of date, that are not being supplied in high enough demand to meet the number of ASM places that are being fought for in schools, and what resources required to make sure that autistic people are included in classrooms.
That's great. Aaron, can I come to you on this one?
Was that me? Sorry, it just got off.
Sorry,
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, and just to feedback on a couple of points there, I just want to say that you know, in regards to the block grant, that is something that the Scottish people is very much entitled to. You know, this is money that has been raised in Scotland as well. We pay a generous amount into the UK coffers. We have a renewable industry that is booming, but although we produce a lot of our energy in the northeast here, we pay the highest prices for it. Maybe going off piece there, but in terms of that, we've still taken a real terms cut in the money that we are receiving from the UK government. And also in terms of taxes in Scotland, we have a fairer tax system. And yes, some who earn more pay a little bit more, but just to say, we generated 1.4 billion in spending, extra spending, to contribute to public services. And that is one way that the SNP government is trying to provide extra funding into our public services. So I would ask, if you want to reform the tax, are you saying that you want to remove that 1.4 billion that we have provided extra through that fairer tax system and remove it from public services? And also in regards to education in particular, if we're talking about pupil support assistants, which are vital within our schools, our education system, and supporting those with autism and neurodivergent conditions. For example, here in Aberdeenshire, the Tory and Lib Dem led council cut pupil support assistants as well as school crossing patrollers, and have been cutting vital services to our education establishments. And also the Scottish Government's block grant that we give to local authorities included 88.4 million for the implementation of the Carers Act. So we are looking at ways to generate money, to get this money, to provide it to public services and resource. But ultimately as well, although, you know, education is devolved to the Scottish Government, we'll have local authorities, local governments who are also have that shoulder the responsibility of how the implementation of the education system works. So I would say that all spheres of government, we're here in Westminster, Hustings, MPs, MSPs, and local councillors need to work together on this and stop pointing fingers back and forth, because if we're all trying to do our very best for people, we could be coming together to find solutions to support. Because if we keep putting money into things, that's fine and fair enough, but at local government level, where it is then dished out, if these things aren't a priority, and it's not an SNP-led local council, we don't have a say over that. So I often think, people don't know or understand how these things work in terms of the different spheres of governments. And I would say, it's a vital importance that we all work together to ensure that people know and understand how these things work. So in terms of support and education, we are putting that fund in there. We are looking with the Aldan Bill how to support autistic people, but we also need local authority support in that too. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. What do you in this one? You there, Eva? Are we having problems with it again? Oh, I think you're on mute. Can we unmute you? Oh, Eva, today is just not your day. Is that something to me to unmute Eva at our end, or no? Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Eva. We'll once again we'll move on to the next question, and we'll come back to you here.
I was to say, is that?
Oh, you're there. You're here. You're great. Brilliant.
I'm here. It's the joys of trying to use two devices. So I would say about this is that yes, that education is devolved. So on a day-to-day level, it is the purview of the Scottish government, and so therefore the SNP in the current situation in Scotland. But in terms of getting it right for the whole, one of the things is about resourcing and making sure we've got the right resources, and that we're rebuilding our public sector, because it has really collapsed over the last 10 to 15 years. And that's one of the key things that the Labour Party is trying to create, is that kind of economic stability and that growth, so that we can all have more investment within our public services across the board. So not just at a Scottish level, but across the board, so that we all can rebuild those. And I think the key thing around education is around that co-production model that is so important in understanding the needs of people. So I worked in the violence against women sector for a really long time, and it's one of the key things there that too often, as you say, people come along and say, oh, you should do it this way, you should do that, and forget to actually listen to the people that are involved. So it's that model of nothing to us without us. And I think that is really key, and resetting that conversation about shared collaboration and learning. And I really like the idea of, you have summits that share the learning and understanding, because there are some really good pockets of good practice, and it is about sharing that and resourcing teachers so that they can have that professional curiosity, and that aren't kind of on their knees trying to deal with everything else that they have to deal with, that we actually fund them properly and support them going forward.
Thanks, Eva. If we move on to employment, there are a couple of questions and a couple of comments about employment. People sort of suggesting that it's, well, one person here suggesting that it was easy to gain employment, but when you get into the workforce, then it's very difficult, because employers don't necessarily know how to deal or react or work with someone who is an autistic adult. Someone else here, I think, was saying that they wanted to be at work, but their boss kept making them, take leave for months, and eventually they got to the point where they took them to a capability hearing and essentially put them out of the job. So, what would your party do to support autistic adults in the workplace? I don't know who I've not come to first, and I don't think I've come to you first. Have I? Have I come to you in this one?
I don't know if you came to me first, I can't remember.
Right.
Get happy to do so. So in terms of this, I would be asking MPs to ensure that the next UK government implemented the recommendations of the Buckland Review in full. Now, this was a review that was done on autism and employment. It was published just in February this year, and it's about supporting employers to recruit and retain autistic people. It's offering autistic people those full opportunities in life to participate in the workplace. The review was really comprehensive, and I would be asking for that. In terms of the Scottish government, we have a fair work policy, and that is where we can. So employment law is reserved to Westminster. It's not devolved issue, but we do have a fair work policy where we can kind of leverage employers to do the right thing when it comes to setting fair work criteria if they're going to be applying for grants or loans, any type of funding, or initiate for contracts and such like. So that's what the SNP is doing in regards to employment. But I would say, overall, as a reserved matter, I would call on the next UK government to absolutely implement the Buckland Review in full. It's really difficult being an autistic adult in the workplace, and I think a lot of my colleagues and my whips, etc., have been on a learning experience and been educated with my journey through this over the last 3 years, and previously as a councillor at Aberdeenshire Council. So I think it shouldn't always be down to the autistic person to say what their needs are, but there should be an allowance of a conversation there. Even in entering employment, I would say as well, something as I became an employer as an MSP, something that we should be very much aware of is supporting people when they attend job interviews, for example. And I know that that's in the Buckland Review as well, and how we can maybe present questions ahead of time just to give people some thinking time. Because it's all about reducing the stressors and reducing the unexpected, what can often put somebody off their stride, and it's not necessarily a downplay on a person's intelligence or performance. It's just that these things just need to be implemented to get the best out of a person. So absolutely, Buckland Review, I'd be asking the next UK government to implement in full. Okay.
That's Karen. Let's come to you next on this one, if that's all right.
Yeah, so the Scottish Conservatives would back the Buckland Review. It's a bold new government-backed review. It set out a vision for workplace culture changes to support autistic people to start and stay in work. So we support that review there. I think it's also really important to give autistic individuals the opportunities to have better training and to have more apprenticeship schemes that are specific to their needs. Here in Aberdeen, we attended an inaugural job fair for people that are on the spectrum and with neurodivergent issues. And whilst there were only a handful of people attended that in terms of people taking part in it, in terms of stalls, there was a lot of people, there was a real demand for that service. So I would like to see more job fairs specific to people that are on the spectrum. I think we also need to have better training and awareness for employers as well who are taking on autistic individuals. I think it's really important to get the environment right in the workplace, as we know that a lot of people that are on the spectrum have issues that are sensory, and often workplaces are just not inviting for people on the spectrum because the lighting can be too harsh, it could be too much noise. There's all sorts of sensory issues there that can take place in the workplace. So I think it's really important to work with employers to make sure that the environments are welcoming spaces for people that are on the spectrum. I'd like to go back to something that Karen said earlier about local authority funding, if that's okay, when we're speaking about cuts to services. Particularly here in the North East, we have not received a fair share of funding from the Scottish Government. So it's inevitable that harsh decisions have had to be made with local budgets. So I would like to see more fair share for funding in the North East. Yeah, that's just a point I wanted to raise there. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks for that, Gillian. Amanda, let's come to you next.
Hi. Well, obviously, autistic people have an awful lot to offer the workforce and the economy, and especially in certain jobs, which they're often, really good at. High functioning autistic people are really good at. And I agree that first of all, they've got to get the jobs in the first place, so they might need help with the interviews and presenting themselves. Perhaps it's they could be offered whether the jobs are either online or how they when they go to the interview. And again, they need to be nurtured in the work environment. So they might need a quieter room to work in. They might need more rest breaks. But again, it's about educating the whole workforce to understand their needs. My husband's actually a STEM ambassador, and he runs a small business that manufacture articulated arms. So he has some people working for him that are on the autistic spectrum, because the finite skills that are required to repeat and keep making the same thing again are really useful. And I know that he does a lot of having to nurture these people and educate the other people that work for him. And so they often need a more quieter environment. So it's also very interesting. I think maybe there's something that should be done with the STEM industries, because autistic people tend to be better at in those kind of jobs. So perhaps STEM ambassadors and the STEMs could look at how we might support autistic people in that work environment. So yes, and I agree with everything of the Buckland paper. I'm sure the Liberal Democrats would be backing that.
Smashing. Thanks, Amanda. Nerys, let's come to you in this one.
Sure. I think something that hasn't been mentioned yet is the Access to Work grant. It is a grant under the UK government that is currently so under-resourced and simultaneously has such little awareness. I imagine some people here that are looking for work might not have actually heard of it before. The wait time for this grant is so long that we are hearing from people in Scotland that by the time that they as autistic people take up an employment opportunity, even one that is we tend to see an increase of short-term contracts that are geared to get autistic people into employment, such as apprenticeships and internships, which is a great idea. But because they are on this fixed-term basis, the wait time for this grant is so long that by the time they get around to their application, they have already finished that contract. I would like to see the Access to Work grant more resourced with shorter wait lists and a more progressive understanding of how it's being used to support people into work, so that the process shouldn't feel so antagonistic compared to what it currently does. When disabled people are applying to try and get into work, it's quite frustrating. The Conservative government introduces this grant to get people into work, but then people are still almost being treated like criminals for applying and are being quite interrogated on the detail of their needs and why they should, you know, what is the justification for being given something as simple as a laptop or a personal assistant? Ultimately, one of the biggest ways to get more people behind autistic-focused workplace policies is encouraging us to get into politics. The Tory government have abolished the Access to Elected Office Fund, which is an invaluable resource to try and enable disabled people to stand for election. I've actually found it really difficult keeping pace with able-bodied candidates on this campaign trail without that funding for support that previously helped the Scottish Greens get the first ever councillor to Edinburgh City Council that uses a wheelchair full-time. So it's kind of disappointing to hear us talking about getting disabled people into work when this party has single-handedly enacted a barrier to this form of work.
Thanks for that, Susie. I'll come to you now, please.
So is that to me?
Yes, please.
Yes, I really want to pick up on the points about access to work, because I think that is a real important thing, especially as the employment laws are completely reserved. And it's one of the things that the Labour Party has committed to, tackling the backlog, but also kind of reviewing the whole process to it. I've gone through it. It's really onerous. Every time you change a job, you have to go through it again as well, which can be a real barrier to, even once you're in the workforce, to actually have that conversation of maybe when you're trying to move up into the workforce and what that looks like, and when you're trying to progress through it. So I think that is really, really key. And that it just shouldn't be an onerous process at all. It should be very much an enablement process to, you know, what do you need and what do you want to get from it. The party is absolutely committed to the recommendations but actually think that it needs to go further. So one of the other things that they're really keen to do is look at leveraging the work around kind of the gender pay gap and the reporting around that to actually go further, one, into disability and into the ethnicity pay gap for large employers, to put the onus on them that they should be doing these things. This is good practice within the workforce of enabling people within that, not just kind of doing it as a tick boxing exercise, which I think is really, really key on this. And one of the reasons, yeah, so I mean, I think those are the things that we have to do around employment at a kind of national employment level. But I think it is also about awareness and really encouraging support and training for people, especially managers. And I think that can make such a difference to people's experience within the workplace, as if they're managers, empathetic, sympathetic, and actually have the understanding to do it. And I know that not just for myself, I mean, I also manage a lot of people, that actually being able to have that conversation, sitting down and saying, I'm not trying to do that, where if you admit something and say, I need this or this or this, it becomes oh, well, you know, you're not capable of the job. It's, oh, okay, so how do we do that? So it's a far more collaborative space. And that takes real training of managers, which I think is something that we forget to do a lot of the time.
Thanks, Eva. Let's move on to a different topic of question, or a different topic now. This one is from Morag. We know from the CAST report that children with autism are impacted by gender ideology. Will you commit to implementing the recommendations from the CAST review? Then we have another one from an anonymous question. I find the prospect of another Section 28 style policy really worrying, along with a rise in transphobia within the autistic community. There is a higher proportion of people in the LGBTQIA community. What will your party do to protect and support LGBTQIA individuals? Karen, I'm going to start off with you. That's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, I mean, I know and recognize the vulnerabilities of our trans children and also our autistic children. And that is why the Scottish Government has invested an extra £9 million into the NHS gender identity healthcare to look at improving but also reforming that care, because we recognise that the most vulnerable people in society need that help and that support, and there's still a lot to do in regards to that. When it comes to the CAST review, that was focused on NHS England, but I do know that Jenny Minto, our public health minister, had noted that there will be a multidisciplinary team led by, I'm just noting here, the Chief Medical Officer, and they are going to examine how the CAST review, or if it does, relates to Scotland. So no, there is an ongoing look into that. But absolutely, our trans people, our LGBT communities need help and support. They're some of the most marginalised people in society, and with the rise of hate crime, with the rise of the hostile environment towards trans people, we have to be really careful how we talk about these things, how we discuss it, and how we present that online as well. I would just say, you know, I'm fully supportive of trans people, of the LGBT community, and absolutely the Scottish Government does keep that as a priority. And I think we saw that with our First Minister, John Swinney, wearing a Progress teacher and t-shirt at Edinburgh Pride this past weekend. And I was really happy to see that. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I'm going to do this round of questions in alphabetical order, so we'll come to Amanda Clark next, please.
Okay, so the Liberal Democrats have always been very proud defenders of LGBTQIA+ rights. Trans people are human, and sorry, I was just looking for my notes. Okay, so with the CAST review, we need to remember that it's young people at the heart of all this. I can't imagine what it must be like myself, you know, to be going through everything that a teenager goes through, and then to be questioning their sexuality, and many of whom will be in a big state of distress. But we need to get to a space where every one of them gets access to the quality care that they need. And I'm going back on our pledge for mental health, getting mental health professionals into all schools, and funding that, on tripling the tax on social media giants. But the Scottish Liberal Democrats have accepted the clinical validity of the review. It's a substantial piece of work, and it's right that we take time to consider its findings and work through how each of the 32 recommendations best apply to the care pathways in Scotland. Ultimately, we think it's right that the decisions about the safety and efficacy of treatments are always made by the clinicians and not politicians. But in her report, again, Dr. Cass rightly underscores the impact of delays, and delays having a profound effect on the mental health, and that can even lead to self-medication and self-harm, which is really worrying. And in addition, we have the stigma and the toxicity of the debate that can have an impact on already vulnerable lives. We must heed her words and consider her review without intolerance and ineffective that characterise so much of the debate in our communities. And we feel, what we would like to say is that we have to think about everybody's dignity and everybody's security while we're debating the Cass report and trans rights. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Let's move on to Eva from Labour now.
Thank you for this question. So I need to take my headphones off when I speak. I think this is really important, and I think that the tone of the debate and ensuring that we can acknowledge the complexities around this issue is really, really important. I think that, you know, it's vital that we stand up for rights of the LGBTQ plus community, and ensuring that trans people have dignity going through that system. And one of the big issues around that is actually the provision of healthcare across the board. And I think, as Amanda mentioned, the issues about waiting times are really quite shocking, and it leaves people in limbo in a really, really difficult situation around that. What I would also say is that what the Cass report has really shown is, I think, twofold, is that it's letting absolutely everybody down. That the current system is not working, and it's leaving vulnerable children with very little choices, and not the support they need, especially around kind of mental health provision. And I think that we need to deal with this with the sensitivity of it, while also ensuring that we are putting the resources and understanding and research into understanding this issue better, and the connections that happen, especially sort of around teenage years, about especially young women that present with autism, and questioning their gender. And I think it's really, really important that we do that sensitively, but we also put the resources and the understanding in, so that we, again, not kind of going down a particular pathway without really understanding the consequences of it. And I think that one of the things that we have to do as politicians is making sure that we're really sensitive, empathetic, and deal with this with humanity, instead of kind of shouting. What quite a lot of the time when this debate happens is you end up hearing lots of slogans on two sides of an argument, and actually the people in the middle that are desperately just trying to live their lives and get the support they need are often forgotten. And I think that it's really important that we all just kind of think about how we talk about this, and ensure that we centre those people within this conversation as well.
Great, so Eva. From the Conservatives, can I come over to you next?
Sorry, was that to me, Andrew?
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, I think this has already been highlighted by others already. I mean, it's a really, really sensitive issue, and we've got to remember that individuals are at the heart of this. And, you know, we obviously LGBTQI rights should be respected. Trans rights matter, and I think that we should be sensitive in how we approach the Cass review. I have not been through all the Cass review proposals myself, but I know that as a party it's something that we support. And as I say, I think we need to come together on this. I think we need to get away from any sort of hype. We need to get down to the nitty-gritty of the review and work together on making sure that everybody is safe and protected. And especially with young children in particular, I think we've got to be really careful that we support young people if they're having gender issues, and we do that in a sensitive manner, and that those that are working with children that are experiencing issues with their gender or their identity, that they're supported and by people that are trained and it's handled sensitively.
Thanks, actually. Nerys, can I come to you on this one, on these two questions, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the cash review first. Well, as a trans person, I'll be fully honest in saying I believe that the media and those in power have found their latest victim here in the same way that they generated fear and misinformation around the AIDS crisis in the 80s and around refugees coming to your town in the 2010s. I want to stick to the facts and the truth here. And the fact is that today in 2024, the total number of trans women who live in the UK is outnumbered by Tory MPs with sexual assault charges. We can't be divided up to the point that we forget what matters. It's genuinely concerning to me that the findings of the cash review have been sensationalised and used as though they justify the creation of additional barriers to healthcare. So, given the questionable methodology of the cash report, I and my party would not look to implement its findings. We have to be informed by science. If we see evidence to the contrary in future with puberty blockers, that is 100% a conversation that we can have, but we have to have it with trans young people at the table. Puberty blockers were not banned for young people with other medical conditions because it's a safe form of treatment. Instead, the government is picking and choosing which young people are deserving of help. And I just think that young people should never have become a politicised weapon like this. For the second question, the protection of the LGBTQ plus community, the Scottish Greens support a full and comprehensive ban on conversion practices. That is honestly the bare minimum, which at one point in time, every party in this call did support. It's been pretty shocking to see the support dwindle to maybe, I think, only 2 or 3 people on this panel. And taking this one step further in Westminster, we have the reserved matter of immigration and external affairs. We have people in other countries that are also currently facing conversion practices on the basis of who they are. I'm genuinely quite scared for fellow members of the LGBTQ plus community from the global south who come to our country for a safe haven, as Scotland once was named world leading for its protections for the queer community. And now we have the Rwanda policy, which will absolutely disproportionately affect queer people coming to this country for safety. It's my belief, and it's the belief of the Scottish Greens, that it is inherently a traumatic and negative experience to try and make somebody what they are not. We support that full and comprehensive ban on conversion practices for the same reasons that we support a social model of support for autistic people, as our combined history is intertwined through society's attempts to assimilate and not accommodate people trying to live as their true selves.
Denise, thank you for that. We're getting close to the end of our session here. We've only really got about 15 minutes left to try and answer as many questions as we possibly can. So I'm just going to ask the panelists just to keep their answers brief if possible, and I will try and keep the questions brief, and we'll see how many more we can squeeze in between now and 22. The next one is just more about sort of representation in Parliament for autistic people. Would you support a Minister for Neurodiversity and Learning Disability at a Westminster level? And should MPs receive autism awareness training so they can effectively communicate with their constituents? Nerys, you're on my screen right now, so can I come to you with this one first? Is that all right? We'll just go in reverse order.
Yeah, sure. I would support an autistic and neurodivergent people's minister. Language is pretty important. This is what autistic people have been overwhelmingly feeding back to Green representatives. So we need to see that reflected. And I think that's pretty fair. Should be a dedicated minister. I think that learning disability should be encompassed on a greater scale within a disabled person's minister or Minister for Disability. Should MPs receive autism awareness training? They are offered it, but it's optional, which is wrong in itself. And I'm actually not sure whether or not it's even offered by autistic-led organisations and charities. So it should be mandated, and it should be led by people with lived experience, not autistic organisations that do not have a majority autistic presence on their board of trustees, and not from parents and carers.
Thanks, Nerys. Gillian, can I come to you on this one?
Well, I'm not sure that I agree with having an individual minister for that, but if that's going to be incorporated into something else, I think that's the way to go. And I also would support MPs and MSPs getting more training for autism and to be able to deal with their constituents better. I don't think that should be voluntary. I think it should be done as some sort of induction scheme. I think very often MSPs and MPs, when they're new, are just thrown into the deep end, and there's lots for them to deal with, but I think that should be a priority.
Thanks for that, Gillian. And then let's go to Eva next, please.
I mean, I think the idea of having a dedicated minister for this and that being competent to kind of wider brief is an excellent idea. And I think, yeah, language does matter on this. It's quite important. I think the idea of having training for MPs and MSPs, I think, is brilliant. I think the training on this and many other subjects when they start to really understand the needs of their constituents, and actually being able to communicate with them properly and empathetically is really key. And I think it would benefit them far more widely than just dealing with autistic and neurodiverse people. I think it would help them deal with lots and lots of different people as well.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Eva. Next on the list is Amanda Clark from the Liberal Democrat.
Okay, well, we've just been discussing about how we should be educating the workforce about autism, and aren't MPs part of the workforce? So absolutely for any education of MPs. I'm a carer for my disabled son. I'm a carer. I've actually had people ask me, how on earth do you think you can become an MP if you're a carer? Well, if we don't get diverse MPs into Parliament, we can't stand up for the diverse people in our communities. So I'm absolutely for a minister for people with autism, autistic people, and I'm in favour of a minister for carers, because that's one thing the Liberal Democrats will always be standing up for, carers. And if we could ask the question about carers, I would love that question about carers, please. Thank you very much. Yes, all for it.
Thanks, Amanda. We will we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Okay. But Karen, let's ask you next about the original question about a ministerial post for people with autism and neurodivergence.
Yeah, I don't know the implications of that, but I mean, in principle, absolutely, I support that, because I think that this goes further than all the different avenues we've discussed today for autistic people. It needs a whole societal shift to understand neurodivergent thinking and how we can help support, embed that into society and everything that we absolutely do. And mandatory training as part of an induction for MPs and MSPs, I think would be fantastic. It would really be support me when I was coming into this job. But I think also what's really important is that we're here from different political parties. Having that, we don't need to wait until these things are law or legislated for. What we can do is within our parties support this, so that when we are looking at candidates, fielding candidates, that we look to support those who are neurodivergent. We look for our autistic members and our activists, and look to see how we can support them in getting through, looking at how we prioritise people on the lists, for example, for Scottish Government elections, but definitely for getting more neurodivergent people into these positions.
And thanks for working through those as well. We are fast running out of time, so let's go to Amanda's question now. 5 days unpaid leave is not much use to unpaid carers. Any plans to improve on this? Okay, well, let's start off with Gillian on that one. In fact, I think, Eva, you've not started yet, have you? So let's give you the first question here. Eva, any plans for Labour to improve on the 5 days unpaid leave?
So I'd say there aren't any specific plans around this, but what our plans are about looking at the entire benefit system around entitlements and things like that, especially looking at how universal credit works, because it clearly isn't working. And I think that's got to be really key into supporting how we work with and support carers, both in allowing them to care, but also keeping them in work that they might want to do as well. So I think it's looking at the whole system, and it's one of the things that Labour Party is really trying to do at the moment, which is not make kind of promises that we can't deliver on, and actually looking at things in a really holistic way to say what can we do when we get into power to actually make the changes that make a difference to people.
Thanks for that, Eva. Nerys, let's come to you in this one about unpaid carers and unpaid carers leave.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, I want to recognise the immense pressure that unpaid carers are under, thanks to this totally broken system of support offered to them. And thanks for raising the point that both the UK and Scottish governments have to keep working to support families, particularly those who continue to work while caring for loved ones. We are in a pretty important year just now. This is the year where the Scottish Government are rolling out their carer support payment to try and replace the UK Government carers allowance. We'll finally be moving to a system that does not punish students who care. But as a carer, I was pretty disappointed to see that the SNP the SNP government's carer support payment is still means tested. If you earn more than £650 a month, you're not eligible, and that is not reflective whatsoever of the fluidity of disability, of carers and their lives. On minimum wage at one point, I was earning double that, and then the next month lost a job and went to zero. I wouldn't have been eligible for carer support one month, I would have the next month, and yet the level of care I delivered remained the same. So as this question is more of a devolved matter, this is absolutely something that I would support our Holyrood colleagues on. I would want to ensure that carers are able to take more leave, that it isn't simply a matter of having to sacrifice either their well-being, the well-being of the person they care for. And I can confirm today that our health and social care spokesperson for the Scottish Parliament, Gillian Mackay, will be pushing the Scottish Government on ending means-tested carer support payments ahead of the national rollout, and will be looking into the matter of more breaks, respite care and unpaid leave, and leave for unpaid carers. We need a collaborative approach in our politics, and I hope that this sort of demonstrates that regardless of who you vote for, the Scottish Greens will still be here actively working on this. We aren't just happy to talk shop at election time. And when it comes to Westminster, what I can do is work to bring more carers into our politics, as they are the experts on what they need. Westminster is still miles behind on accessible working for carers and disabled people. I'd like to bring in affordable on-site childcare. I want to limit the sitting hours of Westminster to slightly more normal or office equivalent business hours. I'd like to bring in full hybrid parliamentary processes so that Scottish MPs can participate from home or an easier location to be with loved ones, and we can see more carers in our politics. And provision of care in general is a devolved matter. So this is one that needs to be kept on the agenda, and I'm really glad that it is being raised here, but let's keep it coming at the council elections and at Holyrood.
Thanks for that, Nerys. Amanda, let's come to you in this one.
Okay, so it was our Liberal Democrat MP, Wendy Chamberlain, who brought in the private member's bill for paid for carers leave. She would have wanted it to be paid leave, but we felt that we needed to get the door open and get the ball rolling and get laws to protect carers. It is a Westminster because it's under employment laws. So what we are demanding, or what we would like to demand, is that the unpaid care leave becomes 10 days paid care leave. And we're looking to do this. We will be petitioning the next government, getting in as many Liberal Democrat MPs that care for carers, petitioning the next government to get that moved to 10 days paid leave. But again, it's all about the understanding of work colleagues, about the pressures that carers have. We've talked about the understanding of supporting autistic people in the workplace. We need to support their carers as well. And again, repeating what we were just saying, it's all about, we, the Scottish Liberal Democrats, have said in our manifesto that I can't survive as a carer without the paid carers that support me. So we would be raising the carers minimum, we would be introducing a carers minimum payment, a paid carers minimum payment, £2 above the minimum wage, and we will be raising carers allowance, which will be carers support payment in Scotland, because these benefits are moving over, and it is very different from the universal credit. And one of the things I've had as a carer who's a retired teacher, I was asked to do a couple of days supply by a school that was desperate for a French teacher, because that was my subject, and they couldn't take me on for the week, because I said, if I come in, I do 2 days supply, I will lose my carers allowance for that week. Because if you go 1 penny over £151, you lose £81.90. And also the other thing that we need to call for is to stop the prosecution of the carers that have gone slightly over their the earnings threshold, and are now the DWP is clawing back millions off them. So we need to support carers, and the Carers Leave Act. Wendy Chamberlain, who's led that through Parliament, will be pushing. Yes, we'll be pushing for that to be paid care, 10 days paid care, as soon as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. Karen, can I come to you in this one, and then Gillian after Karen?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of what we would support at Westminster level is, of course, a review into how employment law affects those who do care, and looking for more flexibility in the workplace, because I think that helps to support carers, more understanding from an employer's point of view. In terms of carers, we supported the living wage for carers in Scotland. We also have, in terms of, I know that we have the carer support payment, but we also have the carers allowance supplement, which is available in Scotland only, not in the rest of the UK. The Scottish Government have implemented that. It's almost an extra £600 per year for carers. We've also implemented the Young Carers Support Grant. We also have the a National Carers Strategy, and that is to help to fund and promote carer positive employer accreditation scheme. So there is a lot of different areas where we're working on supporting carers in the workplace, but also at home, and giving them extra support financially to be able to do their vital jobs.
That's great. Thanks, Karen. Over to you in this one now, please.
So the question about carers leave, I would support an increase in the carers leave. I don't think 5 days is enough at the moment. I mean, the pressures that carers are facing is unprecedented. You know, we've spoken here about caring experiences are not just based on our children and people with ASN. A lot of us are caring for elderly parents and other people. So there's huge pressures on carers. So yes, I would support an increase in the leave for carers.
Smashing. Thanks, Gillian. So getting right down to the end of it now, really. But here's one question. If you could do absolutely anything you wanted and there were no limitations at all whatsoever, what would you do to make things better for autistic people and their families? Eva, let's come to you in this one first, please.
I think the one thing I would, it's a great question. I think the one thing I would do is ensure that you've got awareness training for everyone in every single walk of life, so that they don't have to face the barriers when just trying to exist in the world. So I would kind of roll out training for absolutely everyone to take in that understanding if there was absolutely no limitations at all, and it would allow them to organize the world how they want to.
It's a good answer. Nerys, how about you? What would you do if there were no limitations?
Well, let's be real. I would abolish the DWP entirely and rebuild from the ground up based on the social model of disability, and with an aim to help disabled people, not pushing them into a narrative where their worth depends on how productive they are and how many hours they work. I really do think that there is no ability to reform the DWP in its current form just by another political party moving into number 10 next month, when a culture of hostility and mistrust is just woven into every single level of its operations, its training and hiring processes. Social Security Scotland has turned that narrative around on its head. The new adult disability payment recognises that we are worthy of support, even if our disability is lifelong, or even if we just cannot work. But currently you can't receive additional help, such as the Warm Homes Grant, if you're on benefits like the adult disability payment. And that, I feel, is because we are still tied down to that skewed perspective towards our community that comes from Westminster.
Thanks very much, Nerys. Gillian, over to you.
Well, I think that's a great question, and there's so many things I would like to see change, I think, as along with everybody else in the panel. What I would like to change is a shift in the mindset of society in general, so that people with autism and with different needs can be seen as normal. I hate that term normal. We often hear people say normal, and often children with disabilities or autism are seen as badly behaved, or, you know, are misjudged by a lot of people. So I would like to see more opportunities for neurodivergent individuals, more job opportunities. I would like to see things change in the further education sector as well, because I don't think there's the support that's needed there for teenagers and adults. So that's maybe more than one.
That's okay. You've got Karen, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few good ones that have been covered there, actually. The DWP abolished and rebuilt from ground up is absolutely fantastic. I think, you know, adding to that, what I would like to see is public campaigns. I would like to see adverts during some of the, you know, the high-hitting soaps of the day. I would like people educated on what neurodivergence is, what autism is. When you're pregnant and you're going to be having this baby, and you get a baby book telling you all about what to expect in developmental you know, milestones, and understanding that, you know, things to look out for in case your child might be neurodivergent. And when you get to that point and think, oh, I think my child might be, that there's like a one-step process where you call up or you email in, if like me, you prefer to email because autistic people hate the telephone, and you can just get an appointment and all of a sudden you're there, you're on a list, and there's a whole, you know, multifaceted support system, and whether that child's neurodivergent or not, you get the support for them regardless. But I think in terms of changing society and changing society's attitude towards autistic people, I think that greater need of understanding. Some autistic people don't class themselves as disabled. I often think, do I class myself as disabled? I don't know, but I think, you know, when we think about a societal model, it would certainly be helpful looking at it that way instead of medicalized way, because we really need to ensure that society knows and understands what autism is, because it's sometimes I might not see it as a disability, but I do see it sometimes as a disadvantage. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And last but not least, Amanda, what would you do if you could do anything?
Respite. That, in one word, respite. So we need to have, I mean, Scotland is the most wonderful place. I've got a very autistic son, but he's very physically active. So, you know, I would envisage wonderful places where we could go as a family on holiday. So we could just relax and, you know, not have pressures, but also respite for carers like myself. You know, my husband and I pledged to keep our son with us for as long as possible, but it seems that there's no interim. We've either got to have him full-time at home or in full-time residency. There's not enough places for short breaks. There is a wonderful place that's just opened up in Leven called Inspired Breaks, which I visited with Wendy Chamberlain, and they've got 2 rooms there where my son can go, but it's already so booked up. You know, we can have, the next time we can have a short break weekend is the end of September. So we need a lot more places where autistic people can go and have a little holiday that are short breaks, sort of flexi. At the moment, there's nothing interim. It's either they stay at home with us and we keep them as long as we can, or they're in full-time residential. So respite for holidays, respite for carers, short break respite for carers. We need a lot more of those kind of places, and it would be really great if somehow the Scottish Government and everyone can work together to provide short-term respite places and holiday places for autistic people.
The number of love hearts and thumbs that went up there, I think that's a very popular answer. That's it for the question session. I'm really sorry. We've got through as many questions as we possibly can, but we're sort of now out of time, and there's still a lot of questions that haven't been asked that remain answered. So I do apologise if your question has not been asked. I would recommend that, you know, we've got another week now, 8 days until the election. People might be coming and knocking on your doors, but even if they're not, you can go and find them. You can find out who your candidate is for each of the parties, and I'm quite sure the panel would be happy to receive your emails as well if you wanted to get in touch with them. And if there's something that you didn't get answered or didn't want a bit more clarity on, then I'm sure they're more than happy to help with that. We're going to go into closing statements now, and we're going to do it in reverse of the opening statements, which I think means, Nerys, you go first, don't you? And every speaker gets 2 minutes, apart from Eva, because she didn't get an opening statement, so she might get a couple of minutes extra, if that's all right. She doesn't have to use it, but she's an offer to her. But Nerys, can we start with your closing remarks, please?
Yep, sure. In 2018, I became the first openly autistic person to speak from the House of Commons dispatch box. Without the support of charities like the National Autistic Society growing up, I'm not sure I could have ever achieved that. And 6 years on, I'm standing to represent a hometown that's dear to me. Across Scotland, you deserve to be represented by local voices who reflect your lived experiences, who will platform your issues over petty party politics. When you head to the ballot box next month, remember your vote is powerful no matter what. Don't be pressured into voting for the big parties who failed to meet their previously offered promises. 2 months ago, the SNP-led government abandoned their commitment to cut net zero emissions 75% by 2030. And in Labour, once the Party of Workers, they have unveiled a manifesto that fails to outright ban zero-hour contracts, fails to ban exploitative fire and rehire policies, and they have all but given up on a wealth tax, which could have been invested back into the community. At this election, we are asking people to vote like our future depends on it, because it absolutely does. The Tories and the SNP have had more than a decade to take action on the cost of living crisis that we face, and Labour are promising more of the same. having slashed their green budget proposals before the results are even called. We know now that new ideas and bold action is required to tackle the crisis that we are facing. Scotland had already, with Greens in government, adopted a position of no support for coal, oil and gas extraction on land. In Westminster, we take this one step further and call for a ban on coal, oil and gas companies from advertising in the UK. I'm not a politician. I worked in care homes through the COVID pandemic, and I watched the way in which care workers and the people we looked after were abandoned by Westminster and by Holyrood. Our future does not lie with the party of do not resuscitate orders on neurodivergent people in care, or the party of a meagre £12 per hour for care workers after they worked on the front lines of the pandemic. We've had a lot of promises made today, but my main guarantee is to bring our community of autistic and neurodivergent people the same care and support that we in the community bring one another. I'm running for Alloa and Grangemouth because I believe that if we do not take decisive action on the cost of living crisis we face now, which is ultimately a byproduct of the climate crisis that we all face, then we will all become active participants in the harm that our future generations will experience. So for human rights, for people and for planet, vote like your future depends on it and vote Scottish Greens on July 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Nerys. Amanda Clark from the Liberal Democrats, you're next.
Hello. Well, to conclude, the Liberal Democrats want a fair deal for everyone. This is our chance to win the change our country desperately needs. Everywhere we go across the United Kingdom, we see people from all backgrounds and all walks of life working hard, raising families, helping others by playing the rules. But they have been let down and taken for granted far too long by this out-of-touch Conservative government. Families and pensioners are struggling with sky-high energy bills, food prices and housing costs. And the Conservatives have just added to the pain because they just don't care. Not like us Liberal Democrats, we care. In Scotland, the SNP have plunged the NHS into crisis, caused our schools to tumble down the international rankings and not provided the appropriate support for autistic children in schools. They've repeatedly missed climate change targets. They're letting the government-owned water company get away with pumping filthy sewage into our rivers, lochs and into our beaches. It's time for change. The Conservatives and the SNP have got to go. They've been in power for too long, breaking rules and taking you for granted. And in so many parts of the country, we've shown that it's the Liberal Democrats that can get them out. But this election is about a change of government. More than the change of government, we must transform the very nature of British politics itself, fix the health and care crisis, get our economy back on track and end the appalling sewage scandal, give people the fair deal they deserve. Every vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote to elect a strong local champion who will fight for a fair deal for you and your community, a fair deal where everyone can afford a decent home, safe and clean, with a comfortable retirement when the time comes, a fair deal when every child, including those with autism, can go to a good school and have opportunities to fill their potential, a fair deal where everyone can get healthcare they need, mental health care especially, and when they need it and when they need it and where they need it. That's the fair deal that Liberal Democrats are fighting for. We know we can achieve it, so vote for us and let's make it happen.
That was Amanda Clark from the Liberal Democrats, and I said I was going to go in reverse order, then I sort of changed the order there, so sorry.
You gave me a shock
then. Gillian, I should have come to you there. Gillian, you're up now for your closing remarks, please.
That's okay, no problem at all. Well, I'm here and I'm standing as an MP for Aberdeen North because I really care about rights and to care about children with autism and for families that are affected by autism. This is something that is personal to me, and I am here to represent you and to focus on local issues and local priorities. Here in the northeast of Scotland, we are just not receiving a fair share of funding from the Scottish Government run by the SNP, and that's just not fair. So I would like to see more resources for ASN in this area. I would like to see more respite for carers. I want to see mental health provision go up, and we will do that as Scottish Conservatives will increase that budget by 10%. We've been badly let down by the SNP government here in Scotland, and although that is devolved, I will put pressure on the Scottish Government to put you first and your priorities first. I'm here to listen, and I believe in collaborating where possible with other parties so that we have the best possible outcome for families and for people with ASN needs. I want to see a modern and efficient autism service. I want to see CAMHS waiting times reduced considerably, and I hope that we can do that with the Scottish Conservative Government going forward and in Westminster.
Gillian Tiberan from the Scottish Conservatives, thank you very much. Now to Eva Kessner from Labour.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and your excellent questions this afternoon. And again, sorry for the issues I've had technically. What I wanted to say was that the Scottish Labour Party is standing on the ticket that we really need to enable change across the country, both in Scotland and the rest of the UK. Everyone has been far too let down by 17 years of the SNP here in Scotland and 14 years in governments. All we have seen is sort of chaos upon chaos, crumbling public services, and we really need to rebuild the country. However, it's really important that we do that by trying to be honest and fair to everyone and not try and shy away from the challenges that face us. That's why we really want to make sure that we champion transparency, pragmacy, and community engagement when we go forward. And this is really important to me as it's something I've pursued my entire career. And I really want to make the changes in Scotland, whether it's about economic diversification, making sure that we've got access to the right transport or healthcare access. Therefore, what the Scottish Labour Party is doing is our first 6 steps in terms of how we can rebuild the country and get everyone working together and stop the chaos. The first is really about delivering economic stability. So that is really about implementing tough spending rules so that we can grow our economy, but also ensure that our taxes stay low, inflation stay low, and mortgages as Barbara wrote. This is essential so that we can have the resources to create stability both for our families and business alike. Secondly, we need to cut NHS waiting times, and we need to invest in the NHS across the board. In Scotland, that would mean 160,000 additional appointments every year, paid for by cracking down on tax avoidance and non-dom news points. Everybody deserves timely healthcare, and we also have made commitments about building a national care service as well that would go alongside it. The third is setting up a GB enemy, which would establish a publicly owned clean entity so that communities and us can benefit from the green revolution. Its headquarters would be here in Scotland, and it would aim to cut bills but also boost energy security across the world. This would be funded through a windfall tax on oil and gas giants. Fourth, it's making work pay. So introducing a new deal for workers, which would ban exploitative 0 hours contracts, end fire and highway practice, and give a genuine living wage to everyone, making work pay and be the backbone of a stronger community. Lastly, our fifth one is creating jobs and opportunities for young people. This is access to apprenticeships, support for farm buyers, but also create new jobs in the clean industry for the future. Our young people deserve prosperity and a sustainable future, and we need to be able to deliver that. Lastly, we want to maximise Scotland's influence, both nationally and abroad. This will be leveraging the UK's global trade nurkers and promises to Scottish businesses, boost exports and attract investment to create jobs. Scotland has a proud history of innovation and entrepreneurship, and we need to continue to champion that. Where I'm representing in North Highland, Scotland and the rest of the country deserves change, and the government that won't give them false promises, but real action on the things that matter in an honest and with honesty and humility about the challenges that we face going forward. I hope that you would consider voting for us, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eva Kessner from Labour, and last but not least, Karen Adam from the SNP.
Thank you, Andrew. What I would like to say is that in terms of autistic people, some of the most vulnerable in society, and of course, carers who need that vital support, we have to look at the whole landscape. Across the whole of the UK, we're looking at a Westminster election here, but also how differently we have done things in Scotland with an SNP government. We have austerity, which has been a 14-year project by the Conservatives, cuts in spending to public services. This has absolutely had a detrimental impact upon our spending and upon our public services here in Scotland. 14 years. We're also looking at a Brexit, which has done untold disaster to the whole of the UK, particularly here in Scotland with our rural and coastal communities. We are having a labour shortage because of that, particularly in the care sector. So when there's a lack of carers, we can look towards Brexit for that. Conservatives or Labour are not doing anything about Brexit. They're not barely even addressing it or talking about it. It's because they're ashamed of it and they don't know how to approach it. Look at the cost of living crisis, inflation skyrocketing, mortgage costs because of the Liz Truss budget. What support has there been for anyone? The real impact upon families. It is this poverty, inducing poverty upon our citizens, is causing untold damage. Austerity, Brexit, and the cost of living. What are we going to do differently? Our SNP MPs are going to oppose all austerity measures, which Labour haven't came across any alternatives to what the Conservatives already have in place. Let me be clear when it comes to spending. The Scottish Government have a progressive tax system and have raised 1.4 billion extra for public services because of that. We have the Scottish Child Payment, which has lifted 100,000 child out of poverty. Look at the priorities as well as spending. The Conservative Lib Dem Council in Aberdeenshire cut services to speech and language therapy for our autistic children in Aberdeenshire. They also cut services to overnight minor injury units. These are the SNP group within Aberdeenshire Council had an alternative budget proposal which didn't include these cuts. So what I'm saying is it's not just the money, it's what people are doing with the money. And the SNP prioritises people, prioritises lifting people out of poverty and opposes all the ABC of austerity, Brexit and the cost of living. Please send as many SNP MPs to Westminster as you possibly can to put Scotland's interests first. Thank you.
Adam from the SNP, thank you very much. That's us. That's it. This is, you know, I've done quite a few of these hustings now, and this has been one of the most interesting, I'd say. Can I just thank very quickly our panelists today? We had Karen Adam from the SNP, we had Amanda Clark from the Liberal Democrats, we had Eva Kestner from Labour, we had Julian Tiberin from the Scottish Conservatives, and Nerys White from the Scottish Green Party. Can I also thank Scottish Autism and the National Autistic Society for organising today's event. Mostly, can I thank you for your fantastic questions, really interesting questions. There are now just 8 days to go until the election, so please keep those questions coming, send them to the people on this panel, send them to your candidates. A couple of just quick things that we should point out before the election. Today is the last day, I think, to register for a proxy vote, so if that's something you think you will need, then please get it sorted today. Also, the general election, the rules around voting the general election have changed slightly. We need to take a photographic ID with us. So I think Mark from Scottish Autism has put a sort of list of the suitable IDs or the IDs you're allowed. We'll email some links out as well. But once again, thanks very much for your time today. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. Thanks to our panelists and well, 8 days left. So I hope this helped make your mind up. Thanks. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.